There comes a point in everyone's life when the roles between parents and children begin to evolve and shift. As parents, you spend countless years raising, nurturing, and guiding your children with love and dedication. You make sacrifices, put their needs before your own, and tirelessly work to shape them into responsible and kind individuals. You invest so much into their upbringing, but one day you begin to notice a change. Your children start to act differently. Perhaps they no longer take your advice seriously. They might disregard your opinions or make you feel like an afterthought. Worse yet, you may feel like you're simply a burden to them. This sudden shift can sting. If your children have started treating you with less respect than you believe you deserve, it's natural to feel frustrated, disappointed, or even hurt. You may feel an urge to remind them of everything you've done for them, the sacrifices you made, the years you spent putting their needs first, and the countless hours you dedicated to making sure they had everything they needed. But here's the harsh truth. Getting angry or upset won't solve anything. In fact, it could potentially make the situation worse. Sometimes, responding with anger leads to greater tension, and the disrespect continues. Instead, there's a more effective and constructive way to regain the respect you deserve. This approach doesn't involve fighting or arguing. It doesn't involve creating further conflict or harboring resentment. What it does require is a shift in how you approach the situation. Today, I'm going to share with you 6 actions that you can take when you feel like your children no longer respect you. These are powerful and meaningful shifts in behavior and mindset. They're simple, yet incredibly effective changes that you can make in the way you respond to your children. These changes can have a profound impact on how they perceive you and, ultimately, how they treat you. Some of these actions may surprise you, but if you stick with me until the end, you'll discover how to regain your place as a respected and valued figure in your children's lives. Let's dive in. Action 1. Stop chasing their approval. One of the most common mistakes that parents, especially as they age, make is trying too hard to win their children's approval. It's a mistake many of us have fallen into, even without realizing it. You might catch yourself doing things to accommodate your children, even when it means compromising your own needs. You may find yourself saying yes when you want to say no, or sacrificing your time and energy because you hope that by giving them what they want, they will respect you more. But here's a painful truth. The more you chase their approval, the less they will respect you. This may sound counterintuitive, but it's true. Respect is never built through self-sacrifice. It's built through self-respect. If you're constantly putting your children's needs above your own and allowing them to treat you as if your feelings don't matter, you're inadvertently teaching them that your happiness and well-being are secondary. And once your children begin to believe that your feelings and needs don't come first, it becomes easier for them to take you for granted. Take the case of Margaret, for example. She was a strong and independent woman in her youth. But as she grew older, she began to change. She started deferring to her children in every decision, rearranging her life to accommodate them, and even staying quiet when they spoke down to her. Margaret's mindset was that she was keeping the peace in the family. But in reality, she was losing herself. She thought that by giving up her voice, she was protecting the family dynamic. But what she was really doing was making herself invisible. What Margaret didn't realize was that, over time, her children stopped valuing her. They saw her as someone who would always adjust to their needs, always stay silent, and always put them first. They stopped seeing her as a respected individual and started treating her like a caretaker who was always there when they needed her. But this didn't lead to closeness. It led to distance. If you find yourself in a similar situation where your children no longer seem to respect you, the first step isn't to demand respect. It's to stop acting like you need it. Start setting boundaries. Say no when you need to. Speak up and express your opinions, even if they disagree. The moment you start treating yourself with the respect you deserve, your children will begin to notice, and slowly, they will start respecting you again. Action 2. Lead by example. Don't argue when your children dismiss your opinions or treat you with disrespect. Your first instinct might be to argue with them. You might feel the urge to remind them of everything you've done for them and demand that they listen to you. However, arguing is rarely an effective way to regain respect. Think about it. When was the last time you convinced someone to respect you by fighting for it? Most likely, you can't recall such an instance. That's because respect is not earned through words. It's earned through your actions, through the way you present yourself, and through how you respond when others challenge you. Take the example of Frank, a retired teacher who had spent his career leading a classroom full of students. He was used to being in charge and commanding respect. However, when his children became adults, they started treating him differently. They dismissed his advice, ignored his concerns, and even mocked him when he tried to correct them. At first, Frank argued, tried to remind them of his authority. But the more he argued, the worse the situation became. His children grew resentful, and the gap between them grew wider. Then, one day, Frank decided to try something different. Instead of arguing, he began to listen, truly listen. He stopped trying to prove himself, and instead, he conducted himself with the calm confidence of someone who already had the respect he desired. He no longer felt the need to justify himself. His children began to notice. They saw a man who was composed, confident, and unwavering. In time, they began to treat him with more respect. The lesson here is simple. Instead of fighting for respect, lead by example. Show your children what respect looks like by the way you treat yourself. When you treat yourself with dignity, speak with confidence, and avoid lowering yourself to their level, they will feel it. And eventually, they will start to treat you with the respect you've always deserved. Action 3. Withdraw your emotional dependence. One of the most challenging aspects of aging is realizing that you can no longer rely on your children for emotional fulfillment. As parents, it's natural to want to feel needed and loved by our children, and we often place a great deal of emotional investment in these relationships. However, when your children sense that you need them to make you feel valued, they begin to shift their behavior, and not in a positive way. When you rely heavily on your children for emotional validation, affection, or attention, it places a burden on them. Instead of feeling grateful or honored by your love, they start to feel overwhelmed and even irritated. This emotional dependence creates pressure. It makes them feel like they are constantly expected to fill an emotional void that they might not feel equipped to handle. And the more you pursue their attention, the more distant they may become. I knew a woman named Helen who spent many years dedicated to her children's well-being. She always put them first and took pride in being there for them at every moment. But as they grew older and started their own families, Helen found herself feeling increasingly isolated. Her children were busy with their own lives, and she began to feel the weight of that neglect. Helen found herself waiting for their calls. When they didn't reach out, she would often call them first, hoping to rekindle the connection. She made it clear how much she missed them, how lonely she felt, and how much she longed for their visits. But all of this did was make her children feel guilty. Her calls started feeling like obligations, rather than moments of genuine connection. They began to pull away further. One day, Helen decided to make a significant change. She stopped waiting for the phone to ring. She stopped calling first and instead turned her attention inward. She focused on her own happiness. She started doing things for herself. She picked up new hobbies, spent time with her friends, and took better care of her own well-being. And something remarkable happened. Her children began reaching out to her more often. They started respecting her time and saw her as someone with a full and fulfilling life. The lesson here is clear. The less you depend emotionally on your children, the more they will begin to respect your presence and autonomy. When you stop relying on them for emotional validation and start living your life for yourself, they'll begin to admire your independence and strength. Over time, they'll value you more, not out of guilt or obligation, but because they recognize the importance of the person you are outside of just being their parent. Action 4. Set boundaries and enforce them if you've noticed a decline in respect from your children. One of the most common reasons is because you've allowed it. When you tolerate disrespectful behavior, whether it's through dismissive comments, interrupting, or belittling your opinions, you're silently giving permission for this behavior to continue. People, especially family members, will treat you the way you allow them to treat you. Setting boundaries doesn't mean cutting off your children or creating hostility. It means calmly and firmly communicating what behaviors are acceptable and which ones aren't. You don't have to shout or engage in heated arguments to establish respect. It's about standing your ground, showing them that you value yourself enough to set limits and that you will no longer tolerate disrespectful behavior. Take the story of Robert, a retired businessman who had spent his entire life leading a company with discipline, fairness, and authority. But at home, things were different. His children had grown into adults, and they started treating him as if his thoughts and opinions didn't matter. They interrupted him while speaking, dismissed his concerns, and criticized his life choices. For a while, Robert tolerated it, thinking that it wasn't worth the trouble to fight. But over time, he realized that by staying silent, he was only teaching his children that their behavior was acceptable. Then, one day, Robert decided to take action. When his son interrupted him during conversation, he calmly said, "You can speak when you're ready to listen." When his daughter dismissed his opinion, he responded with, "You don't have to agree with me, but I expect you to respect me." And when they pushed his boundaries too far, he told them, "If you can't treat me with respect, I won't spend time with you." At first, his children were resistant. They didn't understand why their father had changed. But over time, they began to see that he wasn't backing down. He wasn't demanding respect through words or confrontation, but through his actions. He showed them that he valued himself enough to insist on being treated with dignity. Slowly but surely, his children started treating him with the respect he deserved. If you want to regain respect from your children, it's essential to ask yourself, are you allowing them to treat you disrespectfully? If the answer is yes, it's time to set clear boundaries. Don't allow people to walk all over you, even if they're your own children. And more importantly, enforce those boundaries. If they don't respect them, remind them. Respect starts with you, and if you don't stand up for yourself, no one else will. Action 5. Stop giving without appreciation. As parents, we often find ourselves in the position of giving. We give our time, our resources, our energy, and our love without asking for anything in return. And in the early stages of parenting, this is natural. However, as our children grow older, we may continue giving without realizing that our generosity is being taken for granted. One of the quickest ways to lose respect is to give without receiving appreciation. When you give to someone who doesn't acknowledge your efforts or express gratitude, you're not building respect. You're building expectation. The more you give, the more they start expecting it, and the less they appreciate what you do for them. Consider the case of George, a father who had always been generous to his children. He would lend them money whenever they needed it, drop everything to help them, and constantly rearrange his life to accommodate their needs. But instead of gratitude, George received nothing but complaints. His children didn't say thank you for his help. They expected him to continue offering his support without ever recognizing how much he was doing for them. And when George reached out for help himself, his children were too busy to lend a hand. Finally, George decided to stop overextending himself. He stopped offering help before it was even requested and started saying no when he needed to. At first, his children were frustrated and confused. They didn't understand why he was no longer bending over backward for them. But over time, they began to realize that his generosity wasn't an endless resource. It was a gift. They started appreciating his efforts because they understood that his kindness was not to be taken for granted. If you feel like your children don't respect your time, energy, or generosity, take a step back and ask yourself, are you giving more than is healthy? Are you offering support, love, and resources without being appreciated in return? If so, consider what might happen if you stopped giving so freely. When you stop giving without acknowledgement, your children will begin to see your contributions as more valuable and will treat your generosity with the respect it deserves. Action 6. Build a life outside of them. One of the most powerful ways to regain respect from your children is to show them that you have a life outside of them. As parents, we often devote ourselves entirely to our children. We focus on their needs, their growth, and their happiness. This is natural. But as we grow older, it's essential to remind both yourself and your children that your happiness and fulfillment don't revolve around them. If you spent your entire life putting your children at the center of your universe, they may start seeing you as someone who has nothing else going on. They might begin to feel that you are overly dependent on them for entertainment, joy, and validation. And this dependency can create pressure on them. They might begin to feel suffocated, or worse, they might start seeing you as someone with no life of your own. I once knew a woman named Eleanor, a widow in her late 70s, who had spent most of her life dedicated to her children. After her husband passed away, Eleanor poured everything into her children's lives. She constantly checked in on them, offered unsolicited advice, and expected them to fill the emotional void left by her husband. However, instead of growing closer, this behavior pushed her children further away. They visited less, and their calls became shorter. Eleanor felt more alone than ever. Then, one day, Eleanor made a choice. She stopped making her children the center of her world. She joined a book club, started traveling with friends, and volunteered at a local community center. She took control of her own happiness and began to cultivate her own life. Something amazing happened. Her children started reaching out more. They were curious about what she was doing, and they admired her independence. They saw her as a woman who had a rich and meaningful life of her own. If you want to regain respect from your children, ask yourself, do they see you as someone with a fulfilling life, or do they see you as someone who is waiting around for their attention? When you live a life full of purpose, interest, and fulfillment, your children will begin to see you in a completely new light, and they will start to respect you, not just for being their parent, but for the person you become. Respect is not something you can demand from your children. It's something you inspire by how you carry yourself, by how you set boundaries, and by how you live your life. If they've started treating you with less respect, don't waste energy getting angry or frustrated. Instead, focus on shifting your approach. Stop chasing their approval. The less you need it, the more they will give it. Led by example, your dignity speaks louder than your words. Withdraw your emotional dependence. The more independent you are, the more they will respect your presence. Set boundaries. People will only treat you as well as you require them to. Stop giving without appreciation. When generosity is taken for granted, it loses its value. And most importantly, build a life outside of them. People respect those who have their own purpose, their own joy, and their own sense of fulfillment.